everybody, and welcome to the Component Library Style Guide webinar, Overcoming the Curse of Consistency. My name is Eric Gross, and I'll be presenting today. Some housekeeping notes before we get started. Feel free to use the webinar questions panel if you have any questions. And this is about probably about a 35-minute webinar, so we'll have time to do some questions afterwards if you have any. Okay. The objectives is so. To share what we've learned through experience. For about 3 or 4 years, we've been working with on getting their libraries up to date, some migrations, things like that. We've been working with a lot of industries and things like that. So we've learned a heck of a lot over the last couple of years, and we just kind of want to share some of that stuff with you, discuss some important aspects of a healthy component library. And then ultimately, we want to show you the 9.connect style guide that we use with our customers. And we're going to give you a copy of that with this webinar. We'll give you a download copy of it at the end of the webinar for you to use. First thing I want to do is a polling question, if you don't mind. I'd like to find out a couple things here. What the state. I'd like to know if you're a full-time component librarian or if you do librarian roles of your own and that kind of thing. So if you could just set that poll up for a second, I'd really appreciate it if you just answer that. Yeah, so not many full-time component librarians, understood on that. Let's see, we have 56 that do both design and librarian roles. That's what I kind of figured out. And 49% all designers build their own components. Okay, good. Perfect. Okay. If you could just give me one more polling answer to the polling questions, I'm just curious as to where everybody's at with their current libraries. Great. So pretty good shape, but could use some help. That's excellent. Okay. Well, hopefully we'll be able to give you some ideas and things on that we have done in the past to kind of help you develop even a better one. So when we first engage a customer, we want to determine their customer objectives, of course. And in a lot of cases, there could be different things. But sometimes we migrate multiple libraries into one. I know a lot of companies, get merged into 2 companies into one, or they get acquired by somebody. So migration of multiple libraries is a pretty big task, right? You're going to take 2 libraries and merge them into one, and we want to get all the components consistent and things like that. So that's a very big thing that we do sometimes. Sometimes it's a major overhaul of a current library. So we have to change. We help them come up with certain styles and certain parameters and that type of thing to help them to overhaul their library. Sometimes it's just a general cleanup, which sounds like many of you would probably be interested in, is a general cleanup of your own libraries, whether you have somebody full-time that can dedicate to that, or whether it's just something you'll do part-time. A lot of times people come to us because they may need one of these, a general cleanup or something, but it's really hard for somebody that's got a regular job and having to clean up libraries. So sometimes it's just cheaper, easier, and faster to have a third party do that, and we've become very good at that. And then sometimes people want to have sustained library services. So I'm actually a component librarian for several different companies through 9.connect. So we do provide those services, and of course, some people want all of the above. We start with a migration. We overhaul all their symbols and footprints. We do all kinds of cleanups with their folders and things like that. And then we also sustain their libraries afterwards. So where to start? Understanding customer needs. That's pretty obvious, right? Understanding customer needs. The reason I bring this up is that if you're going to make some changes to your library, make sure you know what the changes are that you want. In other words, the last thing you ever want to do is revamp your library and then find out, ooh, that's not exactly what we wanted. We need to do it again. That's not a thing. So we try to understand our customer needs really, really well. And then we evaluate trends in existing libraries and determine which ones to take advantage of. If we see certain trends that are good trends, we usually recommend, hey, let's keep this trend going. A good example is, let's say 90% of the parts have the 3D body on mechanical area 13. Well, we might as well leave it on mechanical 13 and just change the 10% that aren't there, right? Little things like that. But some trends can be bad trends, and we'll say, this is probably not the way you want to do this. Let's make a big change to that. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we create an initial style guide. I'm going to show you the style guide in a few minutes, but we provide examples and things. And you're welcome to use that style guide for your own pleasure and be able to share it with other people within your organization and make, if you ever plan on making changes to your library. And then we determine the proper library structure, naming parameters. It sounds like that's the last thing and the least important, but it's really not. The library structure, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Naming, we're going to actually have a webinar series on naming components and symbols and things like that. And parameters are a big deal too, and I'll talk a little bit about that today, but not much because we're mostly talking about symbols and footprints. Obviously, you know, the healthy component library has these features in it. When I first wrote this slide, I put consistency on top because this is, you know, that's part of that's in the title of the webinar. But then I realized, you know, that's not the most important thing. Accuracy is the most important thing, right? So footprints and symbols have to be accurate, but consistency makes your library easier to use, more efficient. It makes your schematics look better. It makes all your drawings look better, and it's just better for everybody. Folder structure and naming, of course, and parameters. We'll talk a little bit about that, like I said before. But the symbols and footprints is what I'm really going to focus on with our style guide today. Okay, so accuracy, right? So it's an obvious requirement for successful designs, accuracy of your footprint and your symbol. Pin assignments and pad dimensions must be perfect or else, ... And that ... is never going to be a good thing, right? It's either telling your boss that we're going to have to respin a board because a part doesn't fit on the board, or it might be telling the marketing and sales director that we're going to be a month late because we've got to respin. Or it might be telling your manufacturing that they're going to be doing a lot of hand soldering or jumper wiring or something like that. Any one of those ... are no good. So that's why accuracy is just so super important. Now, components from online sources. I know it sounds like everybody, you know, a lot of people in here make their own components, and of course we all use components from online sources. You know, Ultra Librarian or Snap EDA. I make a lot of parts and I use those as much as anybody else. However, I've made enough parts to know that those are not always accurate. And so I would say, you know, 90% of them are great, 95% are okay. And then I have actually found components on there, footprints and symbols that are absolutely wrong. In other words, we're talking respin of a board or doing something drastic to a board. So there's never a time, so using the online sources is good for kind of a baseline, but it is never, I would suggest you never, ever trust it fully. So accuracy, again, 3D step models, we always, in our libraries, in our customers, we always suggest that you're using 3D step models. If you're not using them in your libraries, you really should. It's so good for, especially in Altium. Altium uses a 3D step model for clearances and things like that. And of course, if you're building a footprint and you have a 3D step model from another source and they fit together, it's always a very good feeling when they fit together. And if they don't fit together, something went wrong. Either the footprint went wrong or the 3D model is wrong, but something needs to be checked out. But when they do fit, it's really nice. And now I threw this in here because I actually teach an Altium Designer full spectrum class it's a 4-day class that I teach through Altium or through NI.Connects. In fact, there's a session coming up soon. But one of the things I stress in there, because we go through basically from start to finish in Altium, but one of the things we talk about is libraries. And if you're not familiar with the Smart Grid Paste feature in Altium, it's very nice to be able to take, extract data from a data sheet, put it into an Excel spreadsheet, and then from there, be able to copy and paste it into a symbol. And if you notice here, I've got what I did. In fact, this is just a small part, but I actually had like a 400 pin part one time that I had to create from scratch. And I was able to extract that data out of the data sheet and put it into the component, and I never had to I never had to type in a single number or pin name into the entire part. So whatever the data sheet was, it is, you know, kind of thing. So if you're not using the Smart Grid Paste feature, go out and learn about it because it's very, very helpful if you're gonna if you're going to build large components, large symbols. Consistency, established rules and guidelines for all to follow. Now, when a lot of people come to us and they say, well, we already have established rules and guidelines to follow. And we say, well, let's take a look at them. And what it turns out is that they're very complicated. It might be a 30 or 40 page PDF document and with a lot of words. And so what happens is people look at that and they don't have time to read it or whatever. And when it comes to, it sounds like a lot of people are engineers that create their own components. And what happened to me a lot of times when I was doing stuff like that is, sometimes you're in design mode, you're doing your schematic and maybe you're building parts every day or components every day. And then you go off and you get the board built and you go into the test mode and you go into compliance and do all that stuff. And you may not come back to the design mode for, 6 months or 8 months. And now all of a sudden you have to start making parts again. Well, you've kind of forgotten what the guidelines are and you don't want to read that 40-page document again. So we established a design guide that works really well for being able to quickly look and see how things are to be built, stuff like that. And we're going to show you that in a minute. Naming and parameters, consistency is very important there, right? Symbols, a lot of times we also do a lot of engineering design and PCB layouts, and sometimes we'll get a schematic that has things like symbols that with different colors, different borders, different fonts, different sizes, that kind of thing. And it just doesn't look, it's just hard to read. Consistency is a very nice thing to have. And so what we do is we take symbols like the ones you're seeing there and we kind of revamp them and make them all look the same, and it just looks better. And consistency, of course, is just makes everything easier to work with. When it comes to footprints, this is another one that's very important. We'll get footprints from people's libraries that have the layer structure. The mechanical layer structures are all different. Maybe the courtyard's on layer 15 on some of the parts, maybe it's on 18 on others, maybe it's 21 on others. A lot of times courtyards and things like that, and in any kind of mechanical or drawing type of feature, they have different line widths, different, everything's different. Like you see on the footprint there, one person did the overlay with a couple of lines, the other one did a full outline, one used a pin 1 indication with a number, one used a dot. All that stuff is just inconsistencies that just make things harder down the line. So to keep those consistent is very important. Folder structure. So this is a very important one here too. So we help people with their folder structure, and the whole idea with folder structure is not too few and not too many. Okay, we've seen libraries that go nuts with folders, right? You have to drill down 3 or 4 different levels to find what you want. And it's really hard, but in some cases they need it that way. So it's just deciding what works best for you and your company is the best thing to do. And there should be no ambiguity into where types of components should go. One of the things, if I'm creating some sort of part that could be a driver or could be an interface device, that kind of thing, I don't know which folder to put it in, kind of thing, that can get confusing. And even worse yet, somebody might look for a driver and somebody, they see that it doesn't exist, so they go and request the part or they build their own. They didn't realize it was in the interface folder. So creating this folder structure in a very methodical way is very important. And the goal is to simplify searching and sorting, of course. We want to be able to search these parts and sort them well. Component naming and symbol, that goes along with symbol naming and footprint naming. We're covering that in a current series. So Paul Taubman is covering that in a current 9.Connects webinar series. We've already done one of them, which is the naming connector symbols. If you haven't seen it, if you didn't see that last month, it's on our website. There's a link right there, and I think we're going to put that in the chat window as well. So we can get that in the chat window and you can take a look at that if you want. So I'm not going to go through it too much here. I'm not going to go through naming here because we're going to do a whole webinar series. But what Paul had mentioned last month and what we talk about is the descriptors should be, not too short, not too long, or not too complicated. It needs to be sortable and easy to find. So we spend a lot of time with customers on symbol and component naming. And you can see down here, like for instance, the resistor down there, the RES 0603 10K. So if all the resistors are kind of labeled like that, they're very easy to sort and find. And of course, ICs and things like that that are very unique, you just have to put in the manufacturer's part number. Okay. Parameters. This is one that I want to stress a little bit, because parameters end up being a very big deal, and we spend most of our time working on parameters and templates and things like that with customers. And the idea with these is to use useful parameters only. Sometimes we'll get customers to come in and say, look, we want to have 40 different parameters for a resistor. And it's like, oof, man, I don't know, rethink that, because what happens is you get, when you specify too many parameters, it turns people off from creating good parts, right? They'll get to it and they'll go, well, that's going to take me 20 minutes to get all those parameters. And really, the only thing I need is the manufactured part number and maybe the temperature and voltage. All that other stuff is fluff. But if you've actually made that a requirement, then it just turns people off. So we kind of suggest that, hey, yeah, put the parameters in you absolutely need, for sure, but don't just over parameterize it. And the other thing is spelling. Remember, and those of you that are Altium Designer users, these parameters all have a name and a value. So this name has to be consistent. For instance, manufacturer part number. You can't have somebody do manufacturer part number and then somebody else do manufacturer's part number. That's two different complete parameters. Another person might say, I'm not spelling all that. I'm just going to do MPN. Well, that becomes a completely different parameter. And the other thing Altium does, I'm not really thrilled about, is in their templates, there's a way of forcing the value to be a number, okay? Like for instance, this max supply voltage, 5.5, all you have to do is do 5.5 and it'll automatically put in the volts, okay? Well, the only problem with that is sometimes you're building a value, you want a value to be almost like a description. In other words, if somebody were to just put in supply voltage, and the supply voltage is, say, a range of 1.8 to 5.5. You can't type that in. You can't, if you define it as a voltage, you cannot type in 1.8 to 5.5. So on some parameters, if there's some sort of flexibility in it, you may want to make it just a text value rather than an actual forced value of a voltage or something like that. So that's what I mean by allow some flexibility in the value. Okay, so let's go to the style guide real quick. All right, so this is our style guide. It's not complicated. It's very simple. In fact, it's an Excel spreadsheet, but it works great. Okay, instead of having 40 pages of documentation with text and everything else, we came up with this thing that's been working really well. So what I'll do is usually take somebody's library and actually take to look at symbols. And what we do is we allow our customers to fill these things in if we want. So we'll come up with something over here, but we'll allow them to fill these things in over here. And if you notice, we've got certain things, like we get down to the nitty gritty. That's all about consistency, right? You got to get down to the nitty gritty. In other words, what is the total length, okay? And we make resistors and caps the same length, just in case for some weird reason you want to replace a resistor with a cap, you can do it real easy, okay? We want all caps to be the same length, because if we want to replace those someday, we want them to go right into the part into the schematic without creating problems. Position, pin 1 origin is always an important one, right? So pin 1 origin, I don't know why my thing is not clicking. I'm clicking on that, but it's not working. Anyway, pin 1 origin, making sure that pin 1 is at the origin, right? If somebody makes a resistor with pin 1 at the origin, and another person makes the resistor at pin 2 at the origin, then when you replace a 10K ohm resistor with a 1K ohm, it's going to be flipped and it's going to screw everything up. So consistency, again, is very important for this kind of stuff. Whether you want the pin hidden, the graphics, the colors, the fonts, all this stuff is defined very well. Same thing with an inductor. When it comes to a diode, this is one that gets a little tricky sometimes, because we want to, some people want the, you know, like pin 1 at the anode at the origin, maybe some people want the cathode at the origin, okay? We can set that up, no problem. Pin lengths, colors, again, do you want your pin designators hidden or not? And again, our customers, and you could do this in your groups, you know, you could present this, if you came up with a style guide like this and you present to your group, they can come in and vote on this stuff, right? Well, we want it hidden or we don't want it hidden, and they can make changes to it. One of the big ones is, do you want your pin designators to be, do you want your pin designators to be 1 and 2 or A and K? So these are the kinds of things our customers would define in here how they want it, okay? And of course, stuff like use LED illumination color instead of blue. So if you like the red LED versus just a generic blue, that's good too. Same thing with the transistors, you know, where do you want the origin? Do you want pin designators to be 1, 2, 3, or base emitter collector, or gate drive source, that kind of thing. So all these things can be defined really nicely and really easily. And again, if you have to come back, you know, you haven't built a part in 6 or 8 months and you forget what the rules should be, and let's say you're going to build a new IC. Now, a lot of times people might say, well, I'll just take an original IC symbol and clone it or use that, and that's fine. I do that all the time. But the problem is you might, you know, a lot of times people don't have perfect libraries, and a lot of times when they're migrating things, it might take 6 months to a year to get all your symbols up to date, right? So all of a sudden you grab a, you know, you've been away from designing for 6 months and you grab a symbol that hadn't been up to the latest standards, and now you're just perpetuating the problem, right? You're taking a symbol that's not right and you're cloning it and you're doing it again. So you can take a look at this real quick and go, okay, what was the pin length? Okay, pin lengths are supposed to be 200 mils. What's the position, the origin position at top left? Some people like the box at the origin. Some people like the top left pin at the origin. Some people like the center of the symbol to be the center of the origin. All these things can be defined. So you would, a customer might remove, you know, 2 of these and leave the 1. Let's see, and in this case, you know, the yellow box color, the border, that kind of thing. So we get down to really, you know, nitty-gritty stuff. Negation indication, should it be a bar using the slash after each letter, or should it be single slash negation? All that kind of stuff can be defined in here. And then pin orientation, you can set this up however you want. You know, power pins on the top, ground pins on the bottom, you know, inputs on the left when practical, outputs on the right, stuff like that. Okay, so you can tweak this any way you want. And then we have connectors. Connectors are usually a little bit of a problem because there's all kinds of different types of connectors, how you want to label these, how wide you want them, whether you want mounting tabs or mounting holes and things like that in your symbol and things like that. So all of this stuff can be adjusted to where you like it. And then specialized connectors, everybody's kind of got special connectors and things like that. You can define those as well. And again, what I do is when somebody comes back to me, let's say a customer comes back to me and says, no, we really want this to be 300 mils, okay, in a pin length, and then they mark it red for me, and then I can come back and go, oh, okay, they want something different, so I'll regenerate these and put them back in the style guide. So when it's all done, said and done, the style guide is then released, and that's going to be the style from ever, you know, unless there's changes to it or revisions. Okay. And switches, again, some people have different opinions on how to do switches and things. Crystals, fuses, op amps is usually a hot topic. You know, how do you want your power pins to be shown, that kind of thing. But that can all be defined over here. Same with logic gates. Do you want individual logic gates, or do you want the IC to look like that? So you can actually define all that in here. Test points. And then of course, everybody's got their own, you know, if you're a RF company, you might have antennas. If you're heavily on mechanical stuff that go into the schematic, like you want to have all your mechanical parts in your schematic to be listed on your bill of materials. You might have all kinds of things that go on and on and on. So again, you're going to get a copy of this, and you can add to it or take away, whatever you want to do. Under footprint details, this is a big one because, you know, footprints can get pretty messed up. We've seen, you know, if you've had a dozen engineers all making their own components for 3 or 4 years or longer, then you're probably going to have some inconsistencies unless early on somebody has said this is the way it's going to be and do it this way or else, you know, kind of thing. But so here you can we come up here, and of course units can be millimeters or inches or mils, and then footprint details as far as naming, description, type, and height. You can make that all you want, whatever you want. Orientation, we want 2-pin components to be, horizontal, connectors to be horizontal. Maybe you want ICs to be vertical. You can even define where pin 1 goes. Does it go on the upper left or lower right or whatever? You can set that up. And then we actually have a layer structure, okay? That you would want to define a layer structure for consistency. And that is, all footprints on the top. This is a big one that people can, these two can be swapped if your company is like that. It's always a discussion of should we use the recommended footprint if it's in the data sheet, or should we use an IPC if the recommended is not, that kind of thing. Or should we always go to IPC, that kind of thing. So these are the kinds of things you can add to this or take away however you want. And then each one of these, for consistency again, each one of these mechanical layers should be defined very well. So maybe you have a dot designator layer on M8, M9, what the size of the designator is, if it's centered, 13, 14, 3D body, use step file or extruded, that kind of thing. And then this kind of stuff I get kind of anal on because I think it's important. If you have courtyards, some people don't, but if you do, you might as well make the line width the same on all parts, right? Just, having, if you look at an assembly drawing with, maybe your courtyards and, line widths are all different, it's just not very nice and not very pleasant to look at. So we actually, recommend like maybe a 0.1 millimeter wide line, on the grid, a certain distance from the outline of the component, things like that. And then we usually add, I tell people, mechanical 30 for special notes, for manufacturing notes and things like that. And of course, the overlay, that's another one that's, everybody has to have their opinion on. And, my opinion isn't always right, but, and everybody has different things in their industries, how much, overlay they need, how much they want, how much is too much, how much is too little, that kind of thing. So you can kind of define how you want your overlays and things like that. Do you want a dot? Do you want a number? Do you want a square? Should we go all the way around the part, or should we just, catch the corners, stuff like that, okay? And then even down to the solder mask expansion. So by rule, if meeting the solder mask sliver rule, you want to check, you don't want to create, I know we've all probably been in that situation where you put a footprint down on a PCB and all of a sudden you're breaking all kinds of design rule, you're getting all kinds of DRC violations. And it's not because you did anything wrong, it's because whoever built the footprint might have, made the overlay touch a pad, or you get a solder mask sliver between between two pads because the solder mask expansion is too large, all that kind of stuff. But if you define that in your style guide and say, look, here are the rules that we're going to be specified in the design itself, make sure you don't inadvertently break the rules while you create the footprint, okay? And then you can have hole tolerance and stuff like that for plated and non-plated through holes. Annular rings, you can kind of specify that if you want. And then of course the origin, where do you want to set the origin of the part? Electrical center, outline center, or set to pin 1. Okay, all this kind of stuff can be defined. And then the last thing is kind of designators. Just kind of throw this in here because when you make the symbol, you're going to have to actually put some sort of designator in there, like a C question mark, J question mark, P, that kind of thing, LCD. Some people, like for oscillators, will have X question mark versus OSC, things like that. So you can define all of these as well, okay? So that's, now that you've seen the style guide, I'm going to go ahead and and honestly, just give the honest answers. One of the things we do with these polling questions is we kind of want to see what people want. We don't want to do these, we don't want to waste your time or our time. If you're not interested in some of this stuff, please just let us know, and we'll change things around. We take this very seriously. So if you could just go ahead and answer this question first, and then we'll get another question going soon. Okay, great. I'm glad you guys can, and please use it. I mean, enjoy it. You can tweak it all you want, and maybe it just gives you an idea of some other, there might be some other ideas you have to make it even better. Okay, again, just rate the webinar. I won't take it personally. We just want to know if these are the kinds of things you want, especially when it comes to libraries and things like that, because we are getting pretty darn good at library work these days. We've done enough now, and we spent a lot of time, and we've learned a lot of lessons. So, and please let us know if we can ever help you guys. You know, even if it's just consulting or just a quick question, that's okay as well. Okay. Okay, great. Glad to see that. All right. I'm going to hand this over to Paul for a minute. He likes to give you a little extra stuff to talk about. But we're gonna, I think, Paul, did we put, let's see, okay, so in our handout, in fact, Paul, you can explain it if you want, but in our handouts section of the webinar, the 9.Connects Library Style Guide is there, and you can grab it from there. Okay, go ahead, Paul.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us here today for this webinar. If you are looking for the handout, do look at the panel, the webinar panel that you have there. There should be a sub region in there called handouts, and from there you can grab the style guide that Eric was displaying during the webinar here today. But if you don't mind, I'd like to talk a few minutes to you about 9.Connects. You are definitely here for a reason, right? You recognize the consistency is definitely vital to libraries. And that there's a lot of consistency to maintain. That's, I think, one of the biggest problems. Is just so many little dot the I's, cross the E's type of things. And style guides can provide assistance with maintaining the consistency of the library. It's not going to be a cure-all, but it's definitely going to get you a lot farther than if you don't have anything at all. And plus, hopefully you can see that the whole reason of doing that, as Eric mentioned, it just keeps the documentation simple, right? If you have a quick reference that you can pull up, whether it's on your computer or something you printed out, it's gonna be a lot easier than trying to go through a formal document to make sure that you've done everything properly. Okay, next slide, thank you. So maintenance, we recognize here at 9.Connects that maintenance is definitely not an easy thing to do, right? Anybody who's spent any time doing this, you know this is an endeavor to keep these libraries up. Most companies don't have designated librarians, so I was looking at the initial poll that we did, so that the 5 to 7% of you that do have them or are acting as librarians, that's really great. I hope that your companies cherish you because you're quite an asset. But most of us do have to simply take care of the libraries as part of the design job. And unfortunately, a lot of us work what we'll call libraries by democracy. This is where everybody makes a contribution to it. This is very similar to those things that you see you know, like with wikis, right? People make contributions to it, and the idea is noble, and it's a great idea, but there's always inconsistencies when you do that. So ultimately, when you get enough inconsistencies, you start getting into, can you really trust it, right? And ultimately also becomes individual standards versus company standards, because I may want to do it a certain way, and you may want to do it a certain way, and we may, ultimately what's going to happen is we're going to do it 2 different ways, and maybe we can converge on ideas. But there's going to be some things that we're going to be possibly stubborn about, or we want to see one way versus another. So that's why it's really important that there is some level of company standard which the guide can provide for. And of course, library maintenance is very time consuming, and obviously time is money. And so, you know, when you're putting your time into the libraries, you're pulling yourself away from deliverables. So with that, let me talk a moment about who we are here at 9.Connects. So there's really 3 things that we do here at 9.Connects. We do printed circuit board layout. And yes, we do like the ugly stuff. So if you got something challenging, give us a call. Well, we'd like to see what you got. We also do training as well. There's 2 trainings that we do. There's the PCB Foundations class. So this is for anybody who just wants to get a better handle of the PCB design flow. It's not just for the designers, but it's also for program managers, technicians, even purchasers have come to this class because you just want to understand what's going on. But we also have the Altium Designer Full Spectrum training that is taught by Eric here. Our next one, by the way, is coming up between April 9th and 12th. So if you are interested in that, please do contact us. We're more than happy to provide you some more information. We also do training in Altium 365 as well, though it's a different creature. And the reason why that's a bit of a different creature is because unlike the other 2 classes, which we do in, I believe, about 3 to 4 days, depending on which class we're teaching, 365 requires a team effort. So you meet, we do some homework, we meet again, and then get things moving slowly but steadily through the process, because if you don't have consensus, your A365 is not going to come together. And then lastly, and this is where I spend a little more time on here, is our library services, which Eric mentioned. We have spent quite a bit of time in libraries, And just when you thought you saw it all, someone comes with just a totally different angle that we never thought about. So creation, restoration, creation, migration, and then librarian services. And so let's talk about restoration services or creation services. What we're trying to do is bring the past into the present. So a lot of times people have various libraries. Maybe they don't even really have libraries, they just use parts wherever they could get them. But what we try to do is collect those and bring them into the present. And then once we've collected them and put them into a fashion that are usable, to the customer's desires, then at that point we would like to make sure that that library stays present going into the future, which is kind of a sustainment service that we can provide if interested. But also it's to keep the present in the future, but also parameter cleanup. That's a major thing that we do. Parameters are all over the place. Sometimes people take things from part choices that people type in things differently, as Eric mentioned before. There's a lot of blanks in there, especially if you're using templates. So that's one of the things that we spend time doing. A complete overhaul of the library, that happens quite often. Their customers, even though they had a pretty decent library, they said, like, look, we want to take this a different direction. We don't, for example, like resistors, they may want to make them more generic as opposed to calling out each and every single 0402 brand out there, for example. And then, of course, the merging of libraries due to company acquisitions. This happens quite often. And a lot of times it's really interesting to see what the two companies' libraries look like. So one, for example, we had one customer, everything was in integrated libraries, another one was on Altium 365. So they wanted to merge their libraries together. So we had to basically take everything together and make that come together in Altium 365. So I'll go ahead to the next slide. So how do we, there we go. So how do we make this happen? Well, our secret sauce is basically some custom coding that we have created here at 9.connects. And so, yes, it'd be kind of cool if we could shrink wrap it and give it to everybody or sell it as a a push button solution, but we really can't. And the reason why is because no two companies are the same, right? So what we do is we have a baseline code, but when the customer comes to us, we ultimately have to customize that code. So what do we do with that code? Well, first, when we meet with the customer, we have to define the wish list. And the wish list, we just want to know what the customer wants. So how many categories, or what categories do you want? What parameters you want for each one of those categories. And so that takes a little bit of time. And through some of the coding that we have done, we can also extract out information to show trends, because a lot of people really don't know what they've got. And so we can say, well, according to this, these are the type of parameters you have for resistors. Let's say inductors, here are the parameters that we see happening most often. So this is the kind of information we can provide to the customer. And from there, they start putting together what they wish to have in their library. From there, it's client data extraction, and that extraction comes from all different locations, whether it's through existing stuff on A365. We had one customer who had no libraries. I'm still blown away that they could actually get product done, but they pull things out from other designs. They pull things out from part choices. They pull things out from Octopart. And so what we had to do is literally take their designs, take their bill of materials, and take the purchaser's database and make it all come together. It was quite an endeavor, but we were able to do that. So data extraction is really important. Ultimately, too, is filling in the blanks. And this goes back to the parameters. Not only just putting in the proper formats, but just filling a lot of blanks we find in parameters. Or they may say, we really like to have this parameter. We've never added it before. But yes, okay, we can fill in those blanks as well. Ultimately, there's data processing, which is going through and sorting and making sure everything's in the right category, making sure the parameters are set for each one of the components for that category. And ultimately, we've got to handle the migration. And I wish the migration was a push button feature, but it really isn't. It's something we have to carefully plan, because it does come together with the configuration, especially with Altium 365. You've got to make sure your configuration's right, which means your templates are right, which means your migrations will match with your templates. So there's a lot of moving parts when we do this here. And then lastly, we provide our librarian services. So yes, a lot of customers just say, hey, look, get us cleaned up. We've got librarians, or hey, we can take it from there, and that's fine. But there are other customers who say, like, what, we got into the situation in the first place because we really didn't have librarians. We don't see that happening here in the future. So help us with our librarian services. So what do? Well, we can do the complex 3D. You saw an example of that in the slide, along with some complex footprints. We also have a couple of those posted up on our website. If you ever want to look for it, we have a title called Ugly Components. is to show some things that we've done in the past because there are some ugly components out there. And then also component validation as well. And what we mean by that is that if we create a component, we expect the customer to validate it. And if the customer creates a component, we will validate it for them. So we want to make sure that everything that's being put in there is trustworthy. And that's what we provide here at 9.Connects.